My name is Mildred L. Ribeiro, and I'm 29 years old. I never thought my wedding would be the thing that finally shattered whatever fragile illusion I still had about my family. I always knew there was a distance between us, an invisible line I wasn't supposed to cross no matter how careful I was, no matter how agreeable, no matter how much of myself I trimmed down to make everyone else comfortable. But when my parents offered to pay for the whole wedding, $150,000, no strings attached, they made it sound like love. Real love. The kind that doesn't ask for proof first. And for one reckless moment, I let myself believe them. Growing up, I always felt like the spare daughter in my own house. My older sister, Elena, was the center of gravity. Everything tilted toward her naturally. She had the easier smile, the louder laugh, the kind of charm that made adults lean in and forgive her before she had even done anything wrong. She was honor roll, captain energy, polished without trying. I was the quieter one. I liked structure, plans, little details other people missed. I drew floor plans in the margins of notebooks. I color-coded school projects. I found comfort in things that made sense. My parents liked to describe me as independent, but what they really meant was that I didn't require the same amount of emotional investment. Elena inspired excitement. I inspired relief. My mother, Diana, has always known how to make control look elegant. She's one of those women who can insult you in a tone so warm it takes a full minute to realize you've been cut. She dresses like she might be photographed at any moment, even for grocery shopping. She smiles as if she's bestowing approval instead of showing affection. My father, Gary, is quieter, softer around the edges, but no less responsible. He is the kind of man who lets damage happen right beside him, and then later claims he didn't know what to say. For years, I mistook that silence for helplessness. Now I know it was convenience. Silence is easy when the person being hurt isn't you. Elena could do no wrong, and I could do nothing memorable enough to compete. Every vacation, every birthday dinner, every holiday morning somehow circled back to what Elena wanted, what Elena needed, what Elena was becoming. When I got accepted into college with a partial scholarship, my mother's first response wasn't congratulations. She smiled over her coffee cup and said, "Well, thank goodness Elena didn't choose that school. You would have been in her shadow again." I laughed because she said it like a joke. I laughed because I had been doing that for years. I laughed because if I didn't, I might have asked why she could only see me in relation to my sister. Still, I didn't grow up angry. Not exactly. I grew up resigned. I told myself I didn't need their validation. I told myself I could build a perfectly good life without it. And for the most part, I did. Then I met Daniel. Daniel came into my life 3 years ago through mutual friends, and from the beginning, he felt like the opposite of everything I had grown up around. He was steady, observant, kind in a way that didn't perform itself. The kind of man who remembered how I took my coffee after hearing it once. The kind who noticed when I got quiet and never forced the silence open before I was ready. He worked hard, laughed easily, and somehow made ordinary moments feel solid, safe. We built our relationship the way some people build a house, carefully, intentionally, no rushing, no games, just trust, added piece by piece until it held. When he asked me to marry him last year, it was just the two of us on a foggy cliff along the coast. No crowd, no camera crew of relatives, no social media countdown. Just wind, ocean, his nervous smile, and my heart beating so hard I thought it might split me open. It was perfect because it was ours. Afterwards, his family reacted exactly the way I think family is supposed to react. His mother cried on the phone. His father immediately started offering help. His sister asked what colors I wanted before I had even chosen a date. There was warmth in it. No agenda, no performance. My parents said congratulations and then immediately asked when the wedding would be. Not how are you feeling, not are you happy, not what are you two thinking of doing. Just when's the date, as if they were trying to slot it into a calendar between someone else's fundraiser and a dental cleaning. Even then, I tried not to take it personally. I was used to managing disappointment in quiet ways. 2 months into the planning process, Daniel and I invited both families over for dinner. It was the first time our parents had all been in the same room, and I wanted it to feel like a beginning, something warm, something hopeful. The apartment was small, but Daniel cleaned the entire place twice anyway. I strung tiny lights along the bookshelf. He cooked. I set the table with candles and plates we didn't usually use because I wanted the night to feel special. For the first hour, it actually did. Daniel's father and my father talked about fishing. His mother and my mother discussed flowers and linens in that tentative, polite way women do when they are deciding whether they can trust each other. Even Elena, who arrived late as usual, was charming enough to keep the room smooth. Then my mother lifted her wineglass and cleared her throat. "Well," she said, smiling like someone about to unveil a scholarship, "your father and I have decided we'd like to cover the wedding. Everything. No limits. You two deserve a magical day." The room went still. Daniel looked at me. I looked at him. For a second, I actually forgot how to breathe. "Wait," I said. "Really?" My mother nodded, glowing. "Really. We've talked about it, and we want to give you the kind of wedding you'll remember forever." I should have known something was wrong right then. I should have looked at the timing, the theater of it, the way she made sure everyone else was present to watch her generosity land. But I was caught in the moment, swept up in this bizarre, painful fantasy, where my parents were suddenly thoughtful, loving, proud of me, in a way that didn't have to be dragged out of them. I thanked them. I even got emotional, which I almost never do in front of my family. I remember feeling embarrassed by how much it meant to me, like some small, younger part of me had rushed to the surface and whispered, "See? Maybe this time it's real. Maybe this is what Elena has always felt. Maybe this is what it's like when love arrives before you've earned it." We all toasted. My father nodded like this was the most natural thing in the world. Elena swirled her wine and smiled in a way I couldn't quite read. Then she leaned over and murmured, "Must be nice." The comment lingered with me long after dinner ended. At the time, I brushed it aside. I assumed she was being sarcastic, maybe even a little jealous that the spotlight had landed on me for once. I didn't realize yet that she probably already sensed there was a catch. Maybe she knew my mother better than I wanted to believe I did. For the next few weeks, the whole thing almost felt good. My mother started calling more, asking about venues, flowers, timing. She sounded engaged, interested. She even laughed with me over the phone one afternoon while we talked about ceremony ideas, and I remember pulling the phone away from my ear afterward just to stare at it, startled by how normal it had sounded. Daniel noticed the shift too. "Yeah, your mom's really into this," he said one evening as we looked through venue options outside Portland. "Maybe they're trying," I said. And even to my own ears I sounded cautious, like someone touching a bruise to see if it still hurt. We found a place we loved on the coast. Weathered wood, ocean view, wildflowers along the path. Beautiful without being ridiculous. It was expensive, but not insane. And since my parents had insisted they were covering everything, we let ourselves move forward. I even paid the deposit from my own savings with the assumption they would reimburse us later. About a week after that, my mother called and asked if Daniel and I could stop by the house for lunch. When we arrived, my parents were already sitting out on the patio. Lemonade in glasses, quiche on plates, a manila folder centered neatly on the table between them, like it had been placed there with ceremony. My mother smiled the second she saw us. "We just have a few things to go over." Something in my chest tightened. I sat down slowly. Daniel took the chair beside me. My father said nothing. He just rested one hand near the folder as if guarding it. Then my mother flipped it open and slid the papers toward me. At first, I thought it was a planner's packet, a checklist, a timeline, something helpful. Then I saw the formatting. 6 pages, typed, formal, structured like an agreement. And as my eyes moved down the first paragraph, all that borrowed hope inside me began to turn cold. By the time I reached the second page, my hands had gone cold. It wasn't a planning guide, it wasn't a helpful checklist, it was a contract, a real one, formatted in stiff, formal language like something drafted for a merger, not a marriage. Every paragraph tightened the same invisible leash. Approval over the guest list. Veto power over the venue, including the one Daniel and I had already chosen. Mandatory dress code enforcement. Daniel's suit to be approved by my mother. Elena to be given a central ceremonial role whether we wanted it or not. Seating arrangements that somehow managed to diminish Daniel's family without ever saying so plainly. Speech order with my mother going first, before my future husband, before me, before anyone whose love might actually belong at the center of the day. Then I got to the last section. At the bottom, in neat legal spacing, it said that failure to comply with any of the listed expectations could result in revocation of financial support at any point prior to the ceremony. I looked up so slowly it almost hurt. "What is this?" My mother folded her hands like she had been waiting for me to ask in exactly that tone. "Just a formality, sweetheart." I stared at her. "A formality." "Yes," she said, still smiling. We all want the same thing. This just ensures everyone is on the same page. Daniel leaned slightly closer, and I could feel the tension coming off him in waves. He still hadn't said anything. His eyes were on the papers, but I could tell from the set of his jaw that he was already furious. I looked back down. One clause gave my parents final approval over aesthetic presentation. Another required that any substantial planning decisions be discussed with my mother before being confirmed. There was even language around preserving family values and image, which was vague enough to mean absolutely anything Diana wanted it to mean. And then there it was. The line that made my stomach turn. Daniel's attire, final version, subject to approval by mother of the bride. For a second I thought I had read it wrong. I looked at Daniel. He had clearly just found the same line because he let out a soft breath through his nose, the kind he makes when he is trying very hard not to say something reckless. My father finally spoke. "It's a lot of money, Mildred. We have to be careful." The words echoed inside me. We have to be careful. Like I was irresponsible. Like Daniel was untrustworthy. Like they were investing in a risky business arrangement instead of offering a gift for their daughter's wedding. I turned another page, and it somehow got worse. Elena was not just to be included. She was to be honored. Special placement in the processional. Priority seating. Mention in the printed program. There was no equivalent language for Daniel's sister. No thoughtful consideration for the people who actually showed up for us with love instead of leverage. Just Elena. Always Elena. Even here. Even now. Daniel reached over gently and took the stack from my hands. He read in silence for another 10 seconds before setting it back down on the table with a carefulness that was more chilling than anger. "So if we don't agree to all of this," he said evenly, "you pull the money." My mother tilted her head. "Oh, Daniel, don't be dramatic. No one is pulling anything. We're simply trying to avoid misunderstandings." "By threatening us in writing," I said. She sighed as if I were making things difficult. "You always do this, Mildred. You make everything sound harsher than it is." That landed exactly the way she intended. Not like an argument, like a diagnosis, as if my reaction were the real problem, not the 6 pages of conditions sitting between the quiche and the lemonade. I could feel myself splitting in two. One part of me wanted to explode, to ask whether she understood how insane this was, whether she had ever once considered what it might feel like to have your wedding turned into a hostage negotiation by the people claiming to love you. The other part, the older part, the practice part, wanted to stay calm, stay reasonable, stay readable. Don't give her the satisfaction of calling you emotional. Daniel put his hand over mine under the table. It was the only reason I stayed seated another 30 seconds. My mother leaned forward slightly. "We're giving you a wonderful opportunity here. Most couples would be grateful." I let out a laugh before I could stop it. It came out sharp and humorless. "Grateful for what? Letting you run my wedding?" "Our family has standards," she said, "and apparently Daniel's family doesn't." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." My father shifted in his seat, uncomfortable now, but not uncomfortable enough to interrupt her. He never interrupted her when it mattered. That was one of the quiet laws of our house. Daniel looked at my father. "You really think this is okay?" Gary held his gaze for only a second before looking down at the table. "Your mother put a lot of thought into it." That answer told me everything. Not because it was cruel, because it was cowardly. I stood up so suddenly my chair scraped hard against the patio stone. The sound cut through the air. My mother blinked once, offended by the noise more than the moment. "I'm not signing this." Her expression barely shifted, but I saw something underneath the smile now. Irritation, not surprise. She had expected resistance. She just assumed she could outlast it. "You haven't even taken time to really think it through." "I have thought it through." "Mildred," she said, voice tightening, "don't be impulsive." That almost made me laugh again. Impulsive. I had spent my entire life being the least impulsive person in the room. Elena made scenes. Elena disappeared on weekend trips with men she barely knew. Elena changed jobs and goals and identities every 6 months. But somehow I was the impulsive one, because I refused to let my mother approve my boyfriend's suit like he was a child dressing for prom. Daniel stood beside me. "We should go." My mother looked at him with cool disappointment. "You're encouraging this?" He didn't flinch. "I'm supporting her." That, more than anything, seemed to offend her. I took the papers and closed the folder. For one wild second I considered leaving it there, but something in me wanted the proof, wanted the physical evidence that this had happened, that I wasn't exaggerating, that one day if anyone asked why I walked away, I would not have to rely on memory alone. So I carried the folder with me. The quiche sat untouched on the table. The lemonade sweated in the glasses. My father said nothing as we left. My mother called after us once, her voice bright and brittle. "You're overreacting, Mildred." I didn't turn around. The drive home was silent at first. Not an angry silence, a stunned one. The kind that settles when something you almost believed in dies in front of you, and your mind is still trying to catch up. The folder sat in my lap like it was dangerous. About 10 minutes into the drive, Daniel finally spoke. "Did you know they'd do something like this?" His voice was quiet, not accusing, just honest. I looked out the window at the blur of trees and passing light. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say this was so unbelievable, so bizarre, so far outside the realm of what any normal parent would do, that of course I hadn't seen it coming. But deep down, the truth was uglier than that. "I think," I said slowly, "I always knew there would be a catch." Daniel gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "I just didn't think they'd put it in writing." That was the moment something shifted between grief and clarity. Because once it existed on paper, I could no longer lie to myself about what it was. This wasn't generosity. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't over-involvement from parents who cared too much. It was control. Structured, polished, typed-out control. The kind that smiles while it takes your choices away. Back at the apartment, I dropped the folder on the kitchen counter and just stood there staring at it. Daniel loosened his tie, paced once through the living room, then came back and leaned against the counter across from me. "So what do you want to do?" I knew what the practical answer was. Without their money, we would have to scale everything back. Maybe lose the coastal venue. Maybe cut the guest list in half. Maybe postpone. $150,000 wasn't symbolic. It was real. It was security. It was the difference between a wedding we had only just allowed ourselves to imagine and one we could realistically afford on our own. For one weak, exhausted moment, I almost considered compromise. Not the whole contract, just some of it. Maybe if we gave them a little control, they'd back off the rest. Maybe if I kept things smooth, kept my tone calm, kept my expectations low, the whole thing could still be salvaged. Then I thought about Daniel having to ask my mother to approve what he wore to our wedding. I thought about Elena inserted into the center of my ceremony like a royal appointment. I thought about Daniel's family being pushed to the margins while my mother gave the first speech as if this day belonged to her. And suddenly compromise felt less like maturity and more like surrender. "We're paying for it ourselves," I said. Daniel held my gaze for a second, then nodded once. "Okay, that's it?" He stepped closer. "Mildred, I'd marry you in a parking lot if I had to. I'm not starting our marriage by handing your mother the steering wheel." Something in my chest cracked again then, but this time it was relief. I laughed through a rush of tears I hadn't wanted to let out. "You make parking lots sound romantic." "Only if there are string lights." That made me smile for real, briefly, and then he reached for me and pulled me into him. I stayed there longer than I meant to. That night, we sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, our laptops, and the ugly reality of numbers. What could we keep? What had to go? How much we had in savings? Whether we could get the venue deposit back? Which things mattered enough to protect and which had only mattered because I thought, for once, I was being given something beautiful without having to bleed for it first. Around midnight, after we had reworked the budget twice and gone quiet from exhaustion, I picked up my phone. I texted my mother, "We'll be covering the wedding ourselves. Thank you for the offer." I kept it simple on purpose. No accusation, no argument, no invitation for debate, just a boundary. Her response came 4 minutes later. "That's disappointing, Mildred. We were only trying to help. This is very hurtful after everything we offered." I stared at the screen. Classic Diana. The insult wrapped in injury. The reversal so fast it almost felt elegant. Suddenly she was the wounded one, the generous one, the mother whose kindness had been rejected by her ungrateful daughter. I didn't reply. The next morning, Daniel found me standing in the living room holding one of the wedding mood boards I had spent weeks building, fabric swatches, sketches, saved flower ideas, handwritten notes, all the soft little dreams I had finally let myself make. "I don't know what we're actually allowed to dream about anymore," I said quietly. He took the board from my hands, set it down carefully, and looked at me in that steady way of his that always made me feel less alone. "Anything that belongs to us," he said. "That's what we're allowed to dream about." I wanted to believe that would be enough. At the time, I thought the hardest part had already happened. The contract, the humiliation, the quiet death of one more illusion. I was wrong. That was just the beginning of the Cold War. The Cold War didn't begin with screaming. If it had, it might have been easier to understand. Instead, it began quietly, the way frost creeps across a window overnight. Subtle at first, almost polite. Just enough chill in the air to make you question whether you imagined it, For the first week after I sent that text, my parents said nothing. No calls, no messages, no dramatic confrontations, just silence. I told myself maybe they were embarrassed. Maybe they had realized how far they had gone. Maybe they were giving us space to plan our wedding our way. I should have known better. The first crack appeared in the form of a message my mother sent Daniel. It arrived mid-afternoon while we were both at work. He forwarded it to me with a single line beneath it. Your mom. The message itself looked innocent enough on the surface. A link to a wedding suit designer. A smiling emoji at the end. This brand is much more elegant than what most men wear these days. It would suit Daniel's frame better. Daniel stared at the screen for a moment before glancing at me across the table. Is she picking my clothes now? Apparently. I could already feel the pattern forming. A few hours later, another message arrived. Another link. Another smiling emoji. This one would photograph beautifully. Much classier than darker colors. Daniel didn't reply. Neither did I. 3 days later, my mother sent him a third message. This time it was a link to a bridal dress site. This silhouette would be more flattering for Mildred's figure. Daniel read it out loud. Then he set his phone down very slowly. Your mother just insulted you and tried to control your dress at the same time. I closed my laptop. Welcome to my childhood. After that, Hannah stopped responding completely. The messages continued for a while. Always polite, always smiling, always quietly critical. After the fourth one, Daniel blocked her number. That was when the second phase started. My aunt called one afternoon while I was reviewing spreadsheets at work. Hi, sweetheart, she said, voice hesitant. Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. What's wrong? Well, she began carefully. Your mother was talking to one of her friends earlier today. I think she forgot she was still on voicemail. What do you mean? She left a message on my phone while she was chatting. She was laughing. My grip tightened around the phone. What did she say? My aunt hesitated. She said you were being difficult, that you've always been sensitive, that maybe you're embarrassed she offered so much money. For a second, I couldn't speak. It wasn't the insult that hurt the most. It was the familiarity of it, the way she had always rewritten reality so smoothly, turning her manipulation into generosity and my boundaries into emotional weakness. I hung up and played the voicemail on speaker for Daniel that night. He listened without interrupting. When it ended, he looked at me. Your mom hates me, he said quietly. I shook my head. No, she hates that she can't control you anymore. That realization landed harder than anything else so far, because suddenly the wedding wasn't the real issue anymore. Daniel was. My mother saw him as the variable she couldn't manage, someone who wouldn't smile politely while she rearranged our lives to match her image. And that's when Elena started showing up. At first it was subtle, a casual visit, a quick drop-in while she was nearby, a bottle of wine, a cheerful smile. Just wanted to check in on my little sister, she'd say, flopping onto our couch like nothing had happened. Every visit eventually circled back to the wedding. So have you guys figured out what you're doing now that you bailed on Mom and Dad's offer? Or, you know Mom lives for weddings, right? This whole thing is kind of crushing her. I would laugh awkwardly and change the subject. Daniel noticed it before I did. She's fishing, he said after the third visit. For what? Information. He was right. 2 weeks later, I came home from a late site inspection and saw a familiar car parked outside our building. Elena's. I frowned as I walked upstairs. The apartment door was slightly open. Inside, I heard laughter. I stepped into the living room and froze. Elena was sitting on our couch with a glass of wine in her hand. Pizza boxes were spread across the coffee table. Daniel sat in the armchair looking deeply uncomfortable. Elena looked up and grinned. There she is. I stared at her. What are you doing here? She raised the wine glass. Relax, I brought dinner. You could have called. Spur of the moment. Daniel shot me a look that clearly said, help me. I forced a smile and sat down. Dinner was awkward. Elena was in peak performance mode. Charming. Funny. Teasing Daniel about how serious he always looked, asking about work, complimenting the apartment. Then halfway through the meal, she dropped the sentence that made my stomach drop. Mom says she might still pay for the wedding. I blinked. What? She shrugged casually. You know, if you guys come around. Daniel leaned forward. She told you that? Not directly, Elena said, smirking. But she said she regrets how the contract thing came off. Came off. Like the problem had been tone, not control. She's just waiting for you to be the bigger person, Elena added. The bigger person. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Daniel didn't say anything. He just stood up and began stacking the empty pizza boxes. After Elena left, I asked him how long she had been there before I got home. About 20 minutes. And? She asked a lot of questions. What kind of questions? what kind of honeymoon we were planning, whether we were doing a prenup, stuff like that. The pieces clicked into place instantly. Elena wasn't visiting. She was reporting. I blocked her number the next morning. No argument, no explanation. Just enough. But the real breaking point came 2 weeks later. Daniel and I had just finalized a smaller venue, a beautiful little vineyard outside the city. Affordable, quiet, perfect for the simpler wedding we had come to love. We were standing outside the office choosing chairs when Daniel's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Then he went pale. "What?" I asked. He turned the phone toward me. "Your mom posted something." I opened Instagram, and there it was. Professional photos of an elaborate wedding table setup, gold-trimmed menus, massive floral centerpieces, crystal glasses catching the light. The caption read, "Excited to start planning Mildred and Daniel's big day. Can't wait to celebrate with all our loved ones next month." My heart stopped. We hadn't even chosen a final date yet. The comments were already pouring in. "So happy for them. Beautiful taste, Diana. Your daughter is lucky to have a mother like you." I called her immediately. No answer. I called again. Third ring. "Hi, sweetheart," she said brightly. "Did you see the post?" "What is that?" "Oh, just something fun to get people excited." We haven't even set a date yet. "Well, you've been dragging your feet," she replied lightly. "People keep asking me about the wedding. It's embarrassing not to have an answer." Embarrassing. I felt something inside my chest snap. "This isn't your wedding." Silence. Then her voice cooled. "Mildred, you're being very difficult." "I'm setting boundaries. Maybe you're not ready to get married if you're this defensive." I hung up, not out of rage, out of finality. That night, my father sent an email. Subject line, clarification on family contributions. Inside was a PDF, another contract. This time the offer was $100,000 if we used their venue and allowed my mother to act as the wedding coordinator. I skimmed the document. Then I froze. One clause read, "In the event of divorce, gifted funds may be subject to reimbursement depending on circumstances of fault." They were planning how to reclaim the money if our marriage failed. I read that line 3 times. Then I printed the email. I placed it in the folder with the first contract, the screenshots, the fake wedding post. On the front, I wrote one word, leverage. And for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to be accepted by my family. I started preparing to take control of my own story. After that second contract, something inside me finally stopped trying to negotiate. It didn't feel dramatic. There was no moment where I slammed a door or made a speech about independence. It felt quieter than that. More like walking out of a room I didn't even realize I had been locked inside for most of my life. For weeks after the email, I heard nothing. No texts from my parents. No surprise visits from Elena. No passive-aggressive messages disguised as helpful suggestions. It was like I had been quietly erased from the family network. Even cousins who used to send casual birthday messages went silent. At first, that silence scared me. When you grow up in a house where love is conditional, the absence of attention can feel like punishment. You start to wonder if maybe you should apologize just to make the tension stop. Maybe if you explain yourself clearly enough, they'll understand. But every time that thought crept in, I opened the folder. The contract, the screenshots, the fake wedding post, the reimbursement clause. The evidence sat there quietly reminding me that none of this had been accidental. One night, my aunt called out of the blue. She started with small talk about work and the weather, but I could hear something tight in her voice. Finally, she sighed. "Mildred, I need to say something." I sat down on the couch. "Okay." "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not speaking up sooner." I blinked. "Your mom has been like this for years," she continued quietly. "I saw it. Everyone saw it. We just told ourselves it wasn't our place to interfere." A strange mix of relief and sadness washed over me. So it wasn't just me. "No, sweetheart," she said gently. "It was never just you." She hesitated before adding something else. "You should know they've been telling people things about you." My stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" "That you and Daniel are hiding something, that you cut them out for no reason, that he's controlling you." I laughed softly. "We're not even married yet." "I know, but that's the story they're telling." When the call ended, I went into the bathroom, turned on the shower, and sat on the floor while the water ran. I cried harder than I had in years. Not the quiet kind of crying where you wipe your eyes and keep moving. The kind that makes your chest ache and your shoulders shake. I didn't tell Daniel about it. Not because he wouldn't understand. Because I didn't want my parents to win by breaking something inside me. But when the crying finally stopped, something else had started to grow. Resolve. If my parents were going to erase me from their version of the story, then I would build a new one. We started by tearing down everything about the wedding that had been built around their money. The expensive coastal venue was gone. The luxury caterers disappeared. The designer florist vanished from the budget spreadsheet. Instead, we started from scratch. A small vineyard outside town offered a simple ceremony space with wooden chairs and a wide view of the hills. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't glamorous, but it felt peaceful. Instead of a plated dinner, we hired a food truck run by Daniel's friend's uncle. Mexican fusion tacos that tasted better than any 5-course reception meal I had ever attended. When the owner heard why we were downsizing, he knocked nearly half the price off the contract. "People should get married without drama," he said with a grin. Daniel picked up extra hours at work. I took on additional consulting projects. Slowly, the numbers began to work again. The wedding became smaller, but somehow it also became more ours. During that time, something unexpected started happening. Our lives began improving, not in flashy ways, not the kind that makes social media jealous. The quiet kind. The kind that roots itself slowly. One afternoon, my manager pulled me into her office. "You doing okay?" she asked. "Why?" "You've been working like someone lit a fire under you." I smiled faintly. "Maybe they did." She leaned back in her chair. "Well, whatever it is, keep it up. Your last project blew the client away. I'm moving you onto the new lead contract. Higher pay, more responsibility." For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax. That night, I told Daniel. He lifted me off the ground in a hug. "I knew it," he said. Things started shifting for him, too. A blog he had been quietly writing on the side about architecture and sustainable design suddenly went viral after one article was shared widely. Within weeks, 3 online publications offered him paid writing contracts. The more our family tried to push us out of their world, the more our own world started expanding. By the end of winter, we had saved enough for something I had barely dared imagine: a small house. 2 bedrooms. Sunlight through the kitchen windows in the morning. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Daniel built our dining table himself in the garage over 2 weekends. I painted the walls while standing barefoot on the hardwood floors. Every night we collapsed onto the couch exhausted, but it was the good kind of tired. The kind that comes from building something real. Still, I kept the folder. The contracts. The emails. The screenshots. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I knew my mother. And Diana never lets go of control quietly. The next time I saw Elena confirmed that instinct. I had stopped by our favorite Thai restaurant to pick up dinner. While I was waiting at the counter, the door opened behind me. "Elena," she smiled when she saw me. "Oh, well, look who finally came out of hiding." I grabbed my receipt. "Just picking up food." "So I heard you're still going through with the wedding." I turned slowly. "What does that mean?" She shrugged. "Mom thought you'd cave by now." "Of course she did. She's been telling people you're postponing again." I didn't respond. Elena stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You know she's planning a family meeting, right?" My stomach tightened. "What kind of meeting?" "One where she sets the record straight." I almost laughed. "Is that advice or a threat?" She held up her hands. "Relax, I'm just the messenger." My order number was called. I took the bag and walked toward the door. Before leaving, I paused. "I'm not hiding," I said. "You just stopped looking." Then I stepped outside. For the first time in years, I felt taller than my sister. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and I finalized the last details of the wedding. His best friend would DJ. My cousin Lena agreed to officiate. A local bakery offered us a simple 2-tier cake. We bought strings of lights to hang between the trees at the vineyard. It wasn't the wedding my parents had imagined, but it was exactly the one we wanted. Still, I knew something was coming. You don't challenge someone like my mother without consequences. And sure enough, it arrived one afternoon in the mailbox. A cream-colored envelope, heavy paper, lavender perfume. Inside were 3 handwritten pages from Diana. The first line read, "Mildred, I have thought long and hard about how to reach you." I knew before finishing the letter that nothing about it would bring peace. The letter smelled faintly of lavender and control. My mother had always chosen thick cream paper for anything important. Holiday cards, thank you notes, even grocery lists sometimes. It was her way of making ordinary communication feel ceremonial. Like every sentence carried authority. I unfolded the pages slowly and began reading. "Mildred, I have thought long and hard about how to reach you. Clearly, you've decided to cut us out without explanation, and that is your choice. But I refuse to let lies and misunderstandings shape the narrative of our family." I paused. The narrative of our family. The phrasing told me everything before I even finished the rest of the letter. To my mother, none of this had ever been about relationships. It was about image. I kept reading. She accused Daniel of manipulating me. Said he had isolated me from my family. Said our small wedding would embarrass the family name. She wrote that refusing their financial support was immature and short-sighted, that we were throwing away an opportunity to build something elegant and meaningful. Halfway through the second page, she included a list. Approved guests she expected to see at the wedding. Not suggestions. Expectations. At the bottom, she wrote one final line in neat looping handwriting. We will be hosting a family gathering on the 5th to address this situation face to face. I trust you will have the decency to attend. No RSVP. No invitation. Just an order. I sat at the kitchen table holding the letter for a long time. Daniel came in from the garage, wiping sawdust from his hands, and noticed my expression immediately. What happened? I handed him the pages. He read silently. When he finished, he set them down carefully. She's staging an intervention. More like a press conference, I said, because that was what it felt like. My mother didn't want reconciliation. She wanted an audience. She wanted the extended family gathered together so she could rewrite the story publicly, frame Daniel as the villain, frame me as confused or manipulated, and restore herself as the dignified matriarch trying to rescue her misguided daughter. I folded the letter back into the envelope. What are you going to do? Daniel asked. Nothing. You're not going? No. He studied me for a moment. Are you sure? I nodded. If I go, she controls the room. And if you don't, then she has to perform without me. Daniel smiled faintly. That might be worse for her. Instead of attending the family meeting, I made a different call. To my aunt. The same aunt who had apologized weeks earlier for staying silent too long. When she answered, I asked a simple question. Did Mom invite you to the family meeting? There was a pause. Yes. Are you going? Another pause. I was planning to. I took a breath. What if you didn't? Silence stretched between us for a few seconds. Finally, she said, What are you planning, Mildred? Nothing dramatic. Just something honest. That conversation opened a door I didn't know existed. Over the next week, something unexpected started happening. People began reaching out. Not loudly, quietly. My cousin Lena was the first. She sent a message late one night. Hey, I heard some things about you and Aunt Diana that didn't sit right with me. Can we talk? We met at a coffee shop the next morning. Lena hugged me the moment she arrived. I always knew your mom was intense, she said carefully, but I didn't realize it had gotten this bad. I laughed softly. She's rewriting the story now. Lena rolled her eyes. She's been doing that for years. Then she said something that stopped me cold. I didn't even get invited to your engagement party. We didn't have an engagement party. Her eyebrows shot up. Your mom told everyone she hosted one. That was the first domino. Over the next hour, Lena told me about things I had never known. About how my mother had quietly stopped inviting her to family events years earlier after Lena missed one of Elena's award ceremonies because her son was sick. She said I wasn't prioritizing the family, Lena said bitterly. Then suddenly I stopped getting invitations. Sound familiar? It did. Too familiar. I told Lena everything. The contract. The fake Instagram wedding. The reimbursement clause. By the time I finished, she was gripping her coffee cup so tightly I thought it might crack. Mildred, she said quietly, I have something you should see. She pulled out her phone and opened a photo. It showed Elena at a charity event 2 years earlier, standing close to a man who definitely wasn't the boyfriend she had at the time. They were together for 6 months, Lena said. Everyone knew. What happened? Aunt Diana threatened to cut off anyone who talked about it. I stared at the image. My sister's carefully polished reputation had been protected by the same silence that had kept my struggles invisible. Lena looked me straight in the eye. You're not the first person she tried to silence. You're just the first one who didn't back down. That conversation changed everything. For the next few weeks, I became methodical. Every email, every message, every voicemail. I saved them all. Not because I planned to attack my parents. Because I knew they were building a story. And stories only survive if no one shows the receipts. Meanwhile, I began posting small pieces of my life online. Nothing confrontational. Just photos of Daniel and me painting our new house. Building furniture. Cooking dinner together. Captions like building something from the ground up. I wasn't fighting my mother's narrative. I was quietly replacing it. And something surprising started happening. People reached out. Cousins. Family friends. Even a former neighbor from church. Each message carried the same tone. Relief. Like they had been waiting for someone else to say what they had always known. Then Lena called me again one evening. You know Mom and Dad are planning a huge anniversary party next month, right? 30 years, I said. Yes. Half the extended family is invited. Except me. Lena hesitated. I have an idea. That was when the plan started to form. Not revenge. Something better. Something cleaner. If my mother wanted a performance, I would give her a very different stage. The idea didn't begin as revenge. If anything, it started as something closer to clarity. For most of my life, my mother had controlled the story. Every holiday card, Every family dinner, every conversation with relatives or neighbors had been carefully curated like a public relations campaign. In her version of events, she was always the generous matriarch. Elena was the brilliant golden daughter, and I was the quiet, difficult one who just needed to grow up and appreciate what I'd been given. For years, I had let that narrative exist unchallenged. But the contracts, the fake wedding announcement, the lies she was now telling about Daniel and me, those things had crossed a line. I didn't want to destroy my family, but I did want the truth to exist somewhere outside of their control. That was how the journalist entered the story. She ran a small but widely read blog about family dynamics, generational trauma, and the complicated decisions some people make to go no contact with their parents. Her articles weren't sensational. They were thoughtful, well-researched, and deeply personal. I sent her a short email. I have documentation of parents who tried to control their daughter's wedding with a legal contract and financial threats. Would you be interested in the story if names were changed? She responded the same evening. Yes, very interested. We met 2 days later in a quiet cafe downtown. I brought the folder, the contract, the second contract, the screenshots, the fake wedding announcement, the messages my mother had sent Daniel, the handwritten letter summoning me to the family meeting. The journalist listened carefully as I walked her through everything. She asked thoughtful questions, not the dramatic kind reporters sometimes ask when they're trying to manufacture outrage, but the careful ones. How long has this pattern existed? Did your sister ever question your parents' behavior? What was the emotional impact of seeing control written so formally? By the time we finished, she leaned back in her chair and said quietly, "This isn't just about a wedding." "No," I replied. "It never was." She asked permission to publish the story with names anonymized but details intact. I agreed. The article went live a week later. I didn't share it. I didn't comment on it. I didn't even mention it to anyone. But I knew my mother. Diana monitored the internet the way some people monitor the weather. She searched family names regularly, tracked mentions, read everything. Within 3 days, the article had begun circulating widely online. Thousands of shares, hundreds of comments from people who recognized themselves in the story. Someone inevitably sent it to her. I knew the moment it happened. 3 days before my parents' anniversary party, an email appeared in my inbox. Subject line, "How dare you?" I opened it slowly. The message was exactly what I expected. My mother accused me of humiliating the family. She called me ungrateful, said I had aired private matters publicly for attention. She wrote that Elena was furious because people had begun asking questions about the story. Then she made one final offer. If you retract the article and issue a public apology, we can still repair this. We will pay for the wedding if you agree to do it properly. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the laptop. I didn't reply. Instead, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my boss to request vacation time I had been saving. The second was to the food truck owner we had hired for the wedding. The third was to my aunt. "Are you free on the 5th?" I asked. She hesitated. "That's your parents' anniversary party." I know." Another pause. "What are you planning?" "A picnic." A smile spread across her voice. "I'll bring wine." The day of my parents' anniversary arrived warm and clear. Across town, Diana and Gary were hosting a lavish celebration in a hotel ballroom. Crystal centerpieces, catered dinner, professional photographers capturing 30 years of what my mother called a perfect marriage. Half the extended family attended. Except me. Except the people who had quietly drifted away from Diana's orbit over the years. Instead, our backyard filled with folding chairs, mismatched dishes, and strings of lights tied between trees. Lena came. My aunt came. Several cousins who had slowly been pushed out of family events over the years came. Even a family friend who hadn't spoken to my parents in years showed up with homemade pie. No one dressed formally. No one delivered speeches. People simply talked, laughed, shared stories about the moments they had realized something about our family wasn't quite right. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt honest. That evening, while Diana's ballroom filled with polite applause and curated photographs, our backyard filled with real laughter. The kind that doesn't sound rehearsed. The kind that doesn't need an audience. The next morning, Lena called me. "You won't believe what happened." "What?" "Your mom's party ended early. Apparently, halfway through dinner, someone mentioned the article. Not aggressively. Just curiosity. Did you see that story online about the parents who tried to control their daughter's wedding?" Another guest chimed in. Then another. The whispers spread quickly. My mother tried to laugh it off. My father stayed silent. Elena attempted to change the subject. But the damage was already done. By the end of the evening, several guests had quietly left early. The speech Elena had planned never happened. The photographer packed up before the event was even finished. The party designed to celebrate Diana's perfect image had turned into a room full of quiet questions. And I hadn't even been there. Over the following days, emails started arriving. Relatives apologizing. Family friends admitting they had suspected something for years. One message came from a distant cousin in Arizona who said reading the article made her cry because it reminded her of how she had been excluded from family events years earlier. But the message that affected me most came from someone unexpected. My grandmother, my father's mother. She was 84 and had never taken sides in any family conflict. Her letter arrived in the mail a week later. Inside was a handwritten note and a small check. "I cannot undo the way this family treated you," she wrote. "But I see you now. I want to help. No contracts, just love." I read the letter aloud to Daniel. By the time I finished, both of us were crying. For the first time since all of this started, someone from my family had offered kindness without conditions. And that changed everything.